All right, Prof. Alan Hirsch, leader of the Migration Governance Reform Program at the New South Institute, joins us now to discuss the report unpacking African migration governance and the free movement of people. A very good evening to you, Prof. Thank you so very much for giving us your time.
Good evening, Flo, and thank you for giving me the opportunity.
You're most welcome. I mean, do you agree with what's being said here that, this case was really unwinnable for the South African government?
Well, I think that, public opinion, humanitarian opinion, there were, it was a very difficult case to win. I mean, in fact, the grounds were humanitarian, but they were also technical. They were grounds that the government hadn't consulted with the people who were going to be affected by the change in their status. I think that it's a difficult one. I think that the court didn't make an absolute decision. It made a decision based on the process rather than a decision based on absolute rights.
Yeah.
So I think that the government has a bit of time to think about what they're going to do about it.
And I think that's actually where I want to take it. I mean, what must actually be done to deal with the issue of migration, on a legal level? And of course, as you say, we're also, at the end of the day, dealing with the issue of human rights. It's a humanitarian issue.
Yeah, it's a legal issue. It's a humanitarian issue. It's also an issue of fairness. And the problem is that in South Africa we have so many people who are unemployed.
Yeah.
And we have such a demand for social services, for health, for education, for protection of various kinds, for water. So there's a lot of competition within our society. So it's not it's not an easy position that the government are in. Now, it's only 178,000 people. Now, that maybe doesn't sound like quite a lot of people, but when you think that in the mid-1990s, about 220,000 Mozambicans were offered regularization in South Africa because it was after the Civil War, was over. They'd remained in South Africa. They had jobs. They had families. Cabinet decided in 1996, I think it was, that they could stay. It was probably easier then to make that decision than it is now because unemployment is higher now and the government's purse is much tighter now. But even then, I think they could possibly persuade the people that it's not going to have a big impact on them. The 178,000 Zimbabweans who are here, many of them are educated, many of them are fulfilling quite skilled functions within our society, and we'll probably miss them as much as they miss being here.
Yeah. Prof, what is the role of the Zimbabwean government in all of this? I mean, you raise a very important issue there about the fact that there is, a lot of competition and, especially when it comes to the unemployment crisis, if I can call it that, in the country. And, ultimately all of this leads to what South Africans have been accused of, which is xenophobia. And I mean, on the back of that, is it fair to say that the sentiments that are expressed by South Africans when they point out their issue, that there is rampant unemployment, that when people say it's xenophobic utterances, is it really?
I don't think that's true in most cases. There may be some people who have really xenophobic views, but I think it's mostly people who are afraid of their own circumstances and want to protect themselves. You get the same thing in Europe. Britain voted for Brexit because people were afraid that foreigners were going to be taking their jobs and they were, sharing in their social services. These were mostly, white Europeans from other parts of Europe. I think there's a lot of, when a society promises a lot, like South Africa does to its people, it has free education for poor people. It has free health for poor people. It has generous social grants or relatively generous social grants for a developing country. It offers a lot more than other parts of the region or many other parts of the Southern African region. So you can see that South Africans are afraid that they will be crowded out. I don't think that they're very good grounds for that. There was a surge of immigration into South Africa during the period of the serious Zimbabwean crisis in 2008, 2009. Since then, there hasn't been massive immigration into South Africa. I think we can take it, but I think it's a political issue. Politicians are afraid to say we should share our resources with other people.
Yeah, I think you might have missed my question regarding the responsibility of Zimbabwe, but let me actually ask the question in a different way. No, I'll ask it in a different way in terms of asking where does the responsibility end for a host nation like South Africa when it comes to, initially they come into the country as refugees. So as a host nation, where does your responsibility end when dealing with refugees? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you do have your own people that you have to service and help. As much as we can have all kinds of generous laws, but it does seem as though it does impact, those that are from the host nation.
I don't think there's a simple answer to that question. I think, if you look at the Ukrainians in Europe, if you look at the Venezuelans in Colombia and in Brazil and in other neighboring countries, I think those countries have made a decision, many of them have made a decision to look after those refugees for as long as they need to be looked after. So it really depends on domestic circumstances. And South Africa in 1996 felt it was in a position to look after 220,000 illegal or irregular Mozambican migrants. It's a difficult situation. I don't think that we have the responsibility as South Africans, but I think that we do have some degree of obligation to our neighbors. Our neighbors, during the period of apartheid, accommodated many South African exiles. They supported the struggle, and there is a kind of an obligation there, I would imagine. And there's a kind of a sense of regional reciprocity. We have to live together with our neighbors in a way that we're thinking about the future. We can't just think about the present.
Yeah, and I suppose the argument at the end of the day would be that humanitarian issues and human rights outweigh all other rights. So it would always be difficult, and I think you pointed that out earlier on.
Especially in a society like South Africa, which was born in one of the worst human rights circumstances that the modern world has seen, and built a constitution that is based on human rights. It's difficult to turn your back on your neighbors.
Yeah. Prof, thank you very much for giving us your time. I certainly do appreciate your input then this afternoon. Professor Alan Hirsch is the leader of the Migration Governance Reform Program.